Hello and welcome to the Sidebar presented by True Crime News, taking you inside the courtrooms of high-profile and notorious cases from across the country. I'm your host, Joshua Ritter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer based in Los Angeles and previously an LA County prosecutor for a decade. You can find me on all social media at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. We are recording this on Tuesday, May 13th, 2025. In this week's episode, the New York retrial of Harvey Weinstein continues this week with a new accuser taking the stand, plus explosive testimony in the sex trafficking trial of Sean Diddy Combs as prosecutors open their case focusing on the mogul's alleged abuse of his ex-girlfriend, Cassie Ventura. But first, key testimony in the retrial of Karen Reed as a state trooper testifies for multiple days. I'm flying solo this week, folks, so let's jump right in. First, out of Dedham, Massachusetts, prosecutors presented a key witness in the retrial of Karen Reed as a state trooper took the stand to discuss the investigation surrounding John O'Keefe's death and how Reed became the prime suspect. Through days of testimony, Sergeant Yuri Buchanan described the inquiry into the death from when O'Keefe's body was found frozen in the snow up until Reed's arrest. A key piece of evidence in dispute was a broken taillight on Reed's SUV, which the state argues proves their theory that Reed hit O'Keefe before leaving him to die. Reed's defense has claimed this evidence may have been planted, arguing that the fragments of the taillight recovered at the crime scene weren't discovered until after Reed's vehicle was impounded by police. Buchanan was also asked to read text messages between Reed and ATF agent Brian Higgins that appeared to be of a flirtatious nature, and Reed's defense has suggested Higgins as a possible alternative suspect in O'Keefe's death. Though Buchanan testified that he did not believe Higgins was a credible suspect, a line of questioning surrounding a subordinate of Buchanan's may have hurt his own credibility. Michael Proctor, who was supervised by Buchanan, was a key figure in Reed's first trial as an investigator in the case who demonstrated a bias against Reed, which ultimately cost him his job. In text messages exchanged between Proctor and Buchanan, Proctor called Reed a slur and even remarked that he had not yet found nudes while going through her phone. As a result of these text messages, Buchanan was penalized for failing to adequately supervise Proctor. How the state trooper's testimony sat with jurors remains to be seen, but this trial is ongoing and we will continue to keep you updated. A lot going on this week. The Commonwealth obviously has not wrapped up their case yet. There's plenty of trials still to be had. We still need to hear from medical examiners and experts and all of the people kind of piecing together whether or not, in fact, an accident with a human being took place. But it does look like there may be a possibility that the prosecution, the Commonwealth, might come to a conclusion of the presentation of their case without calling Michael Proctor and Brian Higgins. Now, if you remember, if you've been watching the first trial, or if you've even been watching some of this trial and reading the coverage about it, those two names should mean a lot to you. Michael Proctor played a key role. So did Brian Higgins the first time around. Michael Proctor was the lead investigator. He was a state trooper at the time. He is no longer a state trooper because he's been dismissed. He's been fired in a large part in connection to his work that he did on the investigation into the Karen Reed matter. And then there's Brian Higgins, who was this ATF agent who apparently had some sort of relationship going on with Karen Reed. And in the first trial, he was on the stand to read all those text messages that we just talked about. Now, all of that testimony has essentially been done through Sergeant Buchanan. So we don't know what the prosecution's going to do. They could still call both of these witnesses, but I thought it might be interesting to play this out strategically about what could the Commonwealth do and accomplish, and how might it hurt them or help them if they don't call these witnesses. First of all, just because you called a witness in the first trial does not mean you need to recall that witness in the second trial. It's a brand new trial. You can handle this however you like. I myself have handled retrials that have changed dramatically, strategically in between the two trials. And that includes witnesses that you call or don't call. Perhaps the first time around, you felt it was important to call them, but the fallout from them as a witness was not worth the information that they gave you. The juice was not worth the squeeze, as it were. And it might apply here to both Brian Higgins and Michael Proctor. Now, you say to yourself, well, how in the world can you not call the lead investigator in a case? Well, that's because much of that work was supervised and done along with other officers that you can still piece together the important parts of your case without calling this witness. And why not call this witness? Because of all of the fallout that comes with him. You remember, or if you hadn't watched it, the first trial when Michael Proctor was on the stand was really, I would say, the high point for the defense case. Alan Jackson was able to absolutely make an example of this man through those text messages. And so much of the case and so much of the momentum of the case really seemed to shift when Michael Proctor took the stand. Well, this time around, Hank Brennan might be thinking to himself, I'm not getting into that mess. I'm going to avoid all of that. I know that the defense is still going to bring up those text messages, and I know that they're still going to talk about Michael Proctor, but it's not going to come from me. So one strategy could be don't call these witnesses. If they are called, make the defense do it. Make the defense call them in their own case, if that's how the defense wants to handle this. Then they have to bring those witnesses up on direct examination, which is different strategically, a little more difficult to elicit the things you want. And you're not allowed just to call witnesses to trash them. In other words, if a witness is being called for some reason other than to make an example out of them, that's fine. But you cannot just call a witness to make an example out of them. And they've already kind of made the points that they want to through Buchanan, as far as it goes for Michael Proctor, and perhaps even as far as it goes for Higgins. But is there a strategy with trying to steal some of the defense thunder by calling these witnesses? In other words, if the defense calls them and they don't come from the Commonwealth, does the defense somehow make points, score points with the jury by showing that not only are these bad witnesses for the Commonwealth, but the Commonwealth was trying to hide them from you? We had to call them. We had to put them on the stand so you could see these other people that may have been involved in this cover-up, that may have been responsible for John O'Keefe's death, and they were not called by the Commonwealth because this is all still part of the cover-up. Just some strategies to think about. The other thing to think about strategy-wise is the order in which the Commonwealth is putting together their case. They're starting with the civilian witnesses, the recovery of evidence, some of the investigation, but it seems like they're leaving a lot of the scientific evidence for the end of their case. What do I mean by that? We're talking about the medical examiner. We're talking about the accident reconstruction expert, whoever that's going to be. We're talking about the car data analysis. All of these kind of non-civilian, non-law enforcement, non-eyewitness type of witnesses, but experts, people talking about their opinions on the recovery of this evidence and what that evidence should mean for jurors. And usually the strategy for the prosecution is to leave the strongest parts of your case towards the end. Sometimes you want to put a really good witness on to begin with to set the tone. But usually by the time you're getting, especially in a case that's going to go for several weeks like this, by the time you get to the conclusion, the crescendo of your case in chief, you want to hit that with your strongest evidence so that the jurors are thinking about that going into the defense case. And it remains to be seen how that's going to play out, because as we know, the scientific evidence, especially the medical examiner and the accident reconstruction experts, are going to be one of the most highly contested issues in this entire case. So, fascinating case as it continues to play out. It is certainly not a disappointment, and it's not a complete rerun of what the first trial was. And we will continue to monitor this case closely.
There can be a lot of benefits to therapy, especially if you're having a hard time or you're under a great deal of stress. Rula makes mental health care simple and accessible. They connect you with licensed in-network therapists so you're not stuck with high out-of-pocket costs or long wait lists. Most people pay just $15 a session. That's huge. They have a network of over 15,000 providers across 100 plus specialties. So whether you're dealing with anxiety, depression, grief, whatever it is, Rula will help match you with someone who gets you. And you can often get an appointment in as little as 24 hours. It's not just a one-time match either. Rula sticks with you, making sure that you're making progress and getting the care that you deserve. Join the thousands who have already turned to Rula for support on their journey to better mental health and well-being. Getting started is easy. Just visit rula.com/TCN today. When you sign up, they'll ask you, how did you hear about them? Please support our show by letting them know we sent you. It's a simple way to help us while you take the first step toward the care you deserve. Go to Rula, RULA.com/TCN now and connect with a licensed therapist who truly cares. Your mental health matters.
Let's move along to Manhattan, New York, where a new alleged victim took the stand for the first time in the retrial of Hollywood mogul Harvey Weinstein. Kaja Sokola, the only new accuser to face Weinstein in the retrial, faced multiple days of testimony, alleging the man assaulted her on 3 different occasions, starting when she was just 16. While this is the first time Sokola faced the mogul criminally, she has received nearly $3.5 million from her claims from a compensation fund along with a settlement from Miramax and Disney. Weinstein's defense claimed the woman's allegations were a cash grab to leave her abusive husband and gain a U.S. visa that would be backed by the DA's office in exchange for her testimony. The emotionally charged cross-examination became so contentious that the judge ordered jurors to disregard portions of Sokola's questioning, ruling that the defense went too far into the former model's personal life with her former husband. While Weinstein's 2020 conviction was overturned for the use of evidence outside the scope of the allegations, he could face a longer sentence if convicted this time around with the addition of another criminal charge. This case is probably demonstrating more the point I'm about to make than any case I can think of in recent memory, and that is how difficult cross-examination of a victim of sexual assault can be for a defense attorney. It has to be probably one of the most difficult things that a defense attorney can do, because think about the very fine line you have to walk. First of all, you have to zealously advocate for your client. Not only is it your job, but the person sitting there who paid you, perhaps in this case even, an extreme amount of money to do exactly that, to attack the people attacking him, to impeach the people who are making allegations against him, to call those people to their face in front of a judge and 12 jurors an absolute liar. That's really what this comes down to. This case is not about forensics. This case is not about impartial eyewitnesses. These aren't allegations that were caught on videotape. This is a credibility call. This is a case of he said, she said. And these witnesses, these victims, are getting up and saying these horrible things took place to me. And the reason you should believe that beyond a reasonable doubt is because I'm telling you so and because I'm credible. And therefore, really what the defense is left with is attacking that credibility. They have to call these witnesses liars. So you do that, but at the same time, you have to not risk fallout and having it backfire and making the jury turn against you. Because, folks, they will absolutely do that. They will get turned off by a defense attorney who's far too aggressive. And I wonder if that line has been crossed here. And one way we know that that might have happened is from the judge. If the judge is instructing the jurors to disregard what an attorney has been asking, or is even admonishing that attorney that they're going too far, jurors tend to take their cues from the judge. They tend to think to themselves, I don't quite know the rules here. I don't quite know what is allowed and what's not allowed. But the judge, I believe. the judge is impartial. The judge is the one who's overseeing this whole thing. And if they're telling me that attorney's going too far and what that attorney is doing is inappropriate, I'm going to think it's inappropriate. And therefore, the risk that the attorney is taking is, will they then turn against that attorney and their client moving forward, even outside of this cross-examination? Remember, this case is not being televised. This isn't like reading the transcripts of how this cross-examination took place. Maybe some of these questions were well-crafted questions, but it's all about the real-life drama that's taking place in front of the jurors. They are perceptive to things beyond the words being spoken. And I'm talking about the emotion of the moment, the tension of the moment, the awkwardness. And they might, the problem is, lose sight of the impact of the cross-examination, even if those questions are good questions, and even if they're exposing inconsistencies in that witness's testimony. If the awkwardness, emotion, and tension of the moment gets too much, it might distract the jurors from even appreciating those points. One last thing on this case that I thought was interesting to talk about is, and is more of a question to you folks than anything else, is what do you think about the fact that this retrial has not received the same amount of media and public attention as Weinstein's previous trials? And I think that might just be a commentary on us all culturally, that sometimes we tend to move on from things. And sometimes the initial shock of a moment, doesn't have that same effect. This is now the third trial of Weinstein that we have seen. He was tried in New York, then he was tried in Los Angeles. And after the trial in New York got overturned, this is now trial number 2, making his third trial overall in New York. And so I wonder if maybe we're all starting to suffer a little bit of Weinstein fatigue, and that's why the media in particular has not been covering this case so closely. But we will continue to follow it because it is important, and we will continue to keep you updated.
What's the best financial advice I've ever received? You know what? That no amount is too small to start saving. Every penny counts. Every $5 bill counts, right? Well, today's podcast is sponsored by Acorns. Acorns is a financial wellness app that makes it easy to start saving and investing in your future. You don't need to be rich. Acorns lets you get started with the spare money that you've got right now, even if all you've got is spare change. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns will recommend a diversified portfolio that can help you weather all of the market's ups and downs. You just need to stick with it. And Acorns makes it easy to. Acorns automatically invests your money, giving it a chance to grow with time. With the market in flux, investing now can be more confusing than ever. That's why Acorns is so valuable. It makes investing simple. Sign up now and join the over 14 million all-time customers who have already saved and invested over $25 billion with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/truecrime or download the Acorns app to get started. Paid non-client endorsement compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/truecrime.
Also in Manhattan, the first witnesses have taken the stand against Sean Diddy Combs in the hip-hop billionaire's federal sex trafficking case. Combs stands accused of racketeering and conspiracy, as well as sex trafficking and transportation to engage in prostitution, all in relation to his sex parties known as freak-offs. Prosecutors claim Combs used his fame and influence to operate the orgies like a criminal enterprise, using coercion and violence to pressure participants, including his ex-girlfriend Cassie Ventura. Combs and his defense deny the allegations, claiming that all the alleged victims willingly participated in the sexcapades, adding that any alleged abuse and his, quote, love of baby oil were not federal crimes. The alleged abuse of Ventura, which made national headlines after the release of security footage from a hotel, took center stage in day one of testimony, with a security card from the hotel incident and a male escort testifying for the prosecution. The guard told jurors that he had personally documented Ventura with his phone following the incident, fearing that others wouldn't believe the allegations of abuse, and claimed that Combs even attempted to bribe him. Meanwhile, the escort, Daniel Phillip, claimed that he had been hired by Combs on multiple occasions to have sex with Ventura, while Combs would oversee and instruct Phillip in the acts. Phillip also testified that on at least one occasion he saw Combs become physically abusive with Ventura, allegedly dragging her by the hair into a bedroom before slapping the woman. Additional testimony is expected from Phillip as we're recording this episode, and we will, of course, keep you updated on the case as it progresses. And we now know that Cassie, who is on the stand, will continue to testify throughout the week and perhaps even into next week. This case is going to come down to, obviously, one issue, and that is the idea of consent. But I think it's even more a little nuanced than that. It's something I think perhaps is best described as lifestyle. And it's this idea of, can jurors believe that a man may hire a prostitute, a male prostitute, to have sex with his girlfriend multiple times, that these acts could be outlandish, outrageous, things that are not part of our normal lives, but that it all was done with consent? Or will jurors believe that that simply cannot be the case? In other words, will they believe that the mere description of this kind of extreme, alternative, depraved sort of lifestyle that may not be anything that they have ever experienced in their lives, do they think that that is enough in and of itself to be evidence of a crime? And the defense has basically predicated their entire argument on that exact concept. The idea that, yes, there were sex parties. Yes, he had multiple partners. Yes, even prostitutes were involved, and baby oil and drugs and alcohol and multiple days and sexual acts that you may have never heard of or could wrap your heads around participating in, certainly with someone that you called a loved one. And all of it may be morally offensive and it may be shocking, but are they crimes? And even if something like prostitution, are they what he's actually charged with here? Remember, even the domestic violence abuse that we've seen on that videotape, which is probably the most shocking piece of evidence that we can put our eyes on. I would argue that the most shocking evidence has come from the witnesses describing what they've gone through. But as far as physical evidence like videotape that we can actually watch for ourselves, that videotape that we've all seen at this point is shocking and horrible and absolutely a crime. But that's not what he's charged with. What we see there on that videotape is outside of the statute of limitations. Even the district attorney here in Los Angeles has said, I can't charge him with that. So it's being used in this case for another purpose. It's being used in this case for, I think, a very clever purpose on the part of the prosecution. What they're saying is, we're not showing you this videotape to talk about the crimes committed here. We're showing it to you to talk about control and talk about ongoing abuse and how a person would be afraid to come forward and leave someone like this, because that is going to be a question inside of these jurors' minds. Cassie Ventura is going to testify and has been testifying to some horrible things that she has experienced. And the jurors are going to be thinking, well, then why didn't you leave? Why would you put up with this? Why would you continue to come back to this person if it weren't for consent? And so the prosecution offers something like this videotape to show, well, you don't when you're being controlled like that, when you're being abused like that, when you're operating under a constant state of fear. And that's what is being offered for. But the jurors are likely going to view it in the way that many of us do and say to themselves, the person who could commit that kind of crime, that kind of brutality against a woman is likely the person who would commit all of the other things he's being accused of that I don't have videotape of. Now, is that impermissible? Is that attacking character? Perhaps that will need to be dealt with by the judge and by the prosecution, but it is powerful evidence, and I think it goes towards that same crucial, central question here of, is this just a person living a lifestyle that we can't wrap our heads around, but it is in no way criminal? Or is this depraved lifestyle that we can't wrap our heads around the consequences of somebody who has been conducting a criminal enterprise for years and even decades? Again, a fascinating case, one of the ongoing cases we will continue to keep our eyes on, but that is our show for this week. As always, we would like to give a very special thanks to the listeners and viewers for tuning in. I am your host, Josh Ritter. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Joshua Ritter ESQ. And if you want to hear my thoughts and coverage on even more true crime cases, you can also check out my new YouTube channel, Courtroom Confidential. You can find all of our Sidebar episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and we would love to hear from you. If you've got questions or comments you would like us to address, please tweet us your questions with the hashtag TCNSidebar. And thank you again for joining us at the True Crime News Sidebar.